If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and tap that like button. Your support keeps me motivated to share more heartfelt life stories with you. The night air was cool and still, carrying a soft hush across the quiet neighborhood as Emma carefully closed her car door. She pressed her palm against the metal, steadying it so it wouldn't slam and disturb her sleeping neighbors. A gentle breeze brushed her cheek, sweeping a few loose strands of hair across her face. Only then did she realize she'd been holding her breath. She had just come back from a birthday party, an event that should have been filled with laughter, warmth, and light. The house had been lively, decked with colorful balloons that bobbed cheerfully in the air. Children ran around in playful chaos, and overlapping conversations mingled with the music pulsing from the speakers. Everywhere she turned, people smiled, leaned close to share jokes, and radiated effortless joy. But Emma hadn't felt any of it. To her, the entire evening had unfolded like a scene in a movie. Bright lights, loud voices, and cheerful performances. While she drifted quietly through it all like a shadow in the background. She had smiled when she was supposed to, laughed politely when someone cracked a joke, and nodded through conversations that barely registered in her mind. It wasn't that the party was unpleasant. It simply didn't feel like hers. The joy seemed to belong to everyone else. As she made her way up the short stone path to her front door, the soft crunch of gravel beneath her heels echoed faintly in the silence. A heaviness pressed down on her shoulders. Not the kind that comes from tired feet or a long day, but something deeper, something that lived quietly within her bones. She paused for a moment, glancing at the neat row of sleeping houses on either side, then turned her key in the lock and slipped inside, resting them in her lap as her eyes searched his face for clues. The silence between them stretched, heavy and uneasy. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Daniel, is everything okay?" For a moment, he didn't answer. His fingers flexed slightly, tightening around each other. When he finally looked up, his eyes were distant, shadowed with something she couldn't quite read. "I don't know," he said after a pause, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma's heart tightened. "Did something happen?" she asked carefully, leaning forward. He shook his head, though the gesture seemed uncertain. "It's nothing," he murmured, then forced a faint, brittle smile. "You don't have to worry about me, Mom." But Emma could feel it. Whatever he was hiding wasn't nothing. His tone, the tension in his jaw, the quiet in his voice, it all spoke of something deeper. She wanted to press, to reach out, but something in his expression told her not to push too hard just yet. So instead, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said, even though she didn't believe it. "But if you ever need to talk, I'm here. Always." Daniel gave a small nod, his eyes flickering toward the window where the streetlight shimmered faintly through the curtains. "I know," he said, almost to himself. The clock ticked again, its rhythmic sound filling the quiet room. Emma watched him, her instincts whispering that something inside her son had shifted, something she couldn't yet see, but would soon have to face. Reach her eyes. "It was good," she said softly, her voice carefully even. "Just a little tiring, that's all." Daniel studied her, his expression unreadable. There was something in his gaze, an awareness, a quiet understanding that unnerved her. He had always been perceptive, far more than most boys his age. Sometimes it felt as though he could see the emotions she tried so hard to hide. "You always say that," he said finally. His tone wasn't accusing, but there was a sadness behind it. "Every time someone asks if you had a good time, you say it was fine. Or good, or nice. Never great, never amazing. Just fine." Emma's throat tightened. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was happy, that everything was okay, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she let out a quiet sigh and leaned back in her chair. "Maybe I'm just getting old," she tried to joke, forcing a lightness into her tone that even she didn't believe. Daniel didn't smile. He looked at her a little longer before glancing down again, his voice barely audible. "You don't seem old, Mom, you just seem tired." The words hit her harder than she expected. Tired. It was such a simple observation, but it carried a truth she couldn't deny. She wanted to tell him she was fine, that it was just one of those nights, but instead, she just sat there in silence, her hands resting quietly in her lap, the faint ticking of the clock filling the space between them. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and for a fleeting moment, Emma wondered when her son had become the one seeing through her masks. As she clasped them together in her lap, trying to steady herself, Her mind scrambled for the right words, something that would sound convincing, something that would make this conversation go back to safe, familiar ground. But all that came out was a shaky breath. "I am," she said finally, forcing a small smile. "Of course I am. You don't have to worry about me." Daniel didn't move, didn't blink. His eyes searched hers with quiet persistence, the kind that saw past pretenses and straight into the truth. "You don't have to pretend with me, Mom," he said softly. "I can tell when you're hurting." Emma's chest ached at his words. He was only 17, and yet he spoke with the kind of empathy that felt too old for his years. She looked down, blinking back the sting of emotion that rose behind her eyes. "You shouldn't have to see that," she murmured. "You're just a kid." Daniel shook his head. "I'm not a kid anymore," he said quietly. "And I hate watching you act like everything's fine when it's not. You deserve to be happy, Mom." The words settled deep into her, cutting through the quiet defenses she'd lived behind for so long. She wanted to tell him that happiness wasn't that simple, that life, for her, had become a series of masks and motions she no longer knew how to break free from. But seeing him there, so open, so concerned, made the truth press harder against her chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The house felt impossibly still, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Finally, Emma drew in a trembling breath and whispered, "I'm trying, Daniel. I really am." Daniel's expression softened. He nodded slowly, as though he understood more than she wished he did. Then quietly he said, "I know, but maybe you don't have to try so hard alone." Emma's eyes glistened. For the first time that night, she let the silence between them feel like something real, not heavy or suffocating, but honest.